The water is warm against your skin, and above you the last light of dusk trembles between Palau's limestone islands. You are already beneath the rock islands now, where the lagoon turns from green to blue, and the sounds of the surface begin to thin. Below the coral terraces, the old landscape drops away in quiet steps. Flooded valleys and stone walls softened by centuries of living reef. Small particles drift beside you, almost motionless, as if this sheltered water has been holding its breath for a very long time. The bright fish of the shallows begin to fade behind you, and the color of the lagoon settles into cooler, deeper shades. Here, the southern lagoon is not only a reef, but an ancient basin of drowned limestone with pockets and channels where older water lingers. As you sink along the slope, the world becomes simpler, dimmer, and more still, and the question narrows with the light. What lives down here, beneath the calm surface and the coral gardens, in the layered depths the evening does not quite reach? If you keep drifting downward, the lagoon begins to answer in slower forms, softer movements, and lives that reveal themselves only when the water grows quiet enough. The reef ledge beneath you tilts more steeply now, and the first change is easy to miss unless you let your eyes rest. The branching corals thin out, then break apart into scattered outcrops, each one holding less color than the last. Blue damselfish vanish first, then the small wrasses, and because they disappear, the slope feels suddenly wider. That absence tells you something important. The lively upper terrace is ending, and below it the lagoon begins to sort its life by depth, by light, and by how long each layer of water has stayed in place. You drift a little lower, close enough to the stone to see where living reef gives way to older limestone. The wall is pitted and folded, not built in one smooth line, but shaped by a much older history. Long before the sea flooded this place, rainwater moved through these islands, dissolving the rock grain by grain. It widened cracks, it deepened hollows, it carved channels through what had once been dry land. Then sea level rose, slowly enough for corals to settle over the drowned slopes, and the old landscape remained beneath them, softened but never erased. Because of that, this lagoon is not simply a bowl of seawater. It is a flooded karst country with drowned valleys, enclosed pockets, narrow sills, and shadowed basins where water can linger for a very long time. That is why the descent begins to feel more deliberate here. You could remain above, over the coral terrace, where the last dusk still reaches and the fish still turn silver when they catch the light. Or you could follow the slope down into the darker interior, where the basin keeps older water beneath the evening. You choose the deeper path. It is not a sharp decision, more like allowing the wall to lead you. Because you continue downward, the sounds above seem to lift away all at once, until even the faint chop of the surface becomes only an idea. The water cools by a degree, maybe less, but your skin notices. Particles appear in greater number, not debris, not silt disturbed by motion, but a slow, constant fall of tiny organic fragments, bits of plankton, fine waste, shed cells, microscopic shells, marine snow. In open sea, it drifts through huge distances. Here, within the shelter of the rock islands, it seems to hover, descending through water that hardly wants to move. That stillness is the next clue. A lagoon like this is connected to the sea, but not evenly in all places, and not at all depths. Some passages are broad and flushed by tide. Others are narrow, shallow, or blocked by ridges of reef and stone. Water enters, water leaves. But in the deeper pockets, exchange can be slow. When that happens, the lagoon begins to stack itself in layers. Near the top, warm sunlit water circulates with the reef. Below, cooler and denser water settles into the hollows. The deeper the basin and the more sheltered its shape, the more clearly those layers can persist. Ahead of you, the slope relaxes for a moment into a broad, dim terrace, and beyond it the bottom seems to fall away again. At first you think the pale haze in front of you is only distance. Then a few small, transparent forms catch what remains of the light. Tiny jellies, barely there. soft bells pulsing once, then drifting. They are the first residents to announce that this is no longer the upper reef. They do not hold territory, they do not graze coral. They move with the water, and because they are here, you understand that the basin has begun to favor drifters. A faint ribbon of silvery plankton hangs to one side, suspended as if trapped along an invisible line. That line is real, though you cannot fully see it. Where layers of different temperature or salinity meet, particles often gather. The boundary can be subtle, no more than a slight shift in density. But in quiet water, it becomes a kind of shelf in the sea, a place where drifting things slow down, collect, and feed those able to live in the dim. You pass through it gently. For a moment, the water feels smoother, almost thicker. Then it clears again. The effect is slight, but because you crossed it, the reef above seems farther away than the depth alone would suggest. Now the walls around you begin to matter more than the open water. To the left, a limestone face drops in long grey folds, coated in thin films of algae and encrusting life where light still lingers. To the right, the basin opens into blue that is becoming less blue with every meter. The choice returns in a quieter form. Open water promises the broadest view, but the wall offers evidence. You stay near the stone. That choice changes what the lagoon reveals. In the wall are pockets, small overhangs, old solution hollows once shaped by rain on land, now flooded and lined with life that prefers shade. Inside one recess, a cluster of soldierfish hangs motionless, red fading to brown in the weak light. They face outward, waiting for night to deepen. Nearby, cardinal fish hold their position under a ledge, silver eyes bright in the dim. Their stillness is almost complete. Only the quick opening and closing of their mouths marks the passage of time. These fish belong to the threshold between day and dark. They spend the bright hours sheltered in cavities, then emerge when light falls and the open water becomes safer for feeding. Because dusk is traveling down with you, you are meeting them at the hinge of their day. The limestone itself explains their presence. Palau's rock islands are made largely of uplifted reef and limestone, rain carved over long ages into steep-sided forms. On land, tropical rainfall dissolved the calcium carbonate rock, opening fissures and chambers. Along the shore, waves undercut cliffs and widened recesses. After the sea rose again, those old cavities flooded. Now, under the lagoon, they remain as ready-made shelter. Geology decides where shadow gathers. Shadow decides where certain fish rest, and resting fish draw hunters, scavengers, cleaners, and all the small lives that make use of a dependable wall. Below the cardinal fish, a pair of cleaner shrimp stands in the mouth of a crack, white antennae extending into the water like fine wires. They do not move much, but the ledge around them is alive with minute activity. Copepods flick. A tiny crab folds deeper into a seam in the stone. Feather-like arms of a brittle star extend from beneath a sponge and slowly withdraw. The deeper you go, the more life seems to favor edges. Not broad coral gardens now, but borders, the rim of an overhang, the lip of a cavity, the meeting place of still water and faint current. That pattern has a cause. Light is fading, so algae and corals lose some of their advantage. Food arrives from above as falling matter or sideways in weak flows, and hard surfaces become places where waiting makes sense. Sponges begin to appear more often than branching corals. They rise in muted tubes and folds from the wall, filtering what the water brings. A few sea fans angle out into the dimness, where the current brushes past the stone. Higher on the slope, shape and color belong to the reef itself. Here, shape belongs to the water moving over rock. You continue down along a diagonal cut in the wall, and another development appears. The falling particles are no longer evenly scattered. Instead, they seem concentrated in horizontal veils, as if the basin is preserving old breaths of water one above another. This is how enclosed marine basins often behave. Warmth, salt, oxygen, and nutrients do not always mix quickly. A shallow sill or narrow passage can limit renewal below a certain depth. Organic matter from the productive upper lagoon sinks and decays. Microbes consume oxygen as they break it down. If fresh oxygen-rich water does not replace the deep layer efficiently, then lower depths begin to differ more strongly from the reef above. Not dead, not empty, just governed by a slower chemistry. Your own descent makes that chemistry visible in indirect ways. The fish of the reef edge have grown scarce. The drifters have become more common. And every so often, in the corner of your sight, there is the briefest pulse of cold light. It comes once, then again farther off. A pinprick, blue-green, then gone. Bioluminescence in sheltered tropical water is often easy to overlook at first, because the eye keeps hoping for sunlight. But as dusk weakens, the living lights gain confidence. A comb jelly passes below you, almost invisible except for the traveling shimmer along its ciliary rows, like faint rainbow glass moving through blackening water. Its body is fragile enough to seem imagined. Yet, it is perfectly fitted to this quiet. No need for speed, no need for force, just a transparent body, a mouth, and rows of beating cilia carrying it through the layered basin. Because the water is so still, even the smallest movement feels amplified. A shrimp flashes and disappears. A ribbon like lava twists once, then hangs upright again. A cloud of zooplankton thickens around one dim pocket near the wall. Where they gather, something larger follows. You notice it only when it turns. A small squid, nearly clear, with a body that reflects almost no light at all. It holds itself in place with tiny adjustments, then glides into the particle-rich layer and vanishes. That is another answer to the question you brought downward. What lives here is not always what remains in view. Much of the deeper lagoon belongs to brief appearances. Animals emerge into a favorable layer, feed, then fade back into dimness before the eye can settle on them. This makes the basin feel secretive, though the better word may be selective. It reveals what matches the hour, the depth, and the chemistry of the water. The terrace below is now visible only as a paler darkness. When you reach it, the reef structure is mostly gone. Under you lies fine sediment, interrupted by scattered blocks of limestone and low mounds of rubble where older slopes have shed material over time. The shift is important because it changes the whole ecology around you. Coral terraces build habitat upward, adding branches, ridges, and crevices toward the light. Sediment basins collect what falls. They smooth things out. They record. Each grain settling here carries a little history with it. Bits of shell, carbonate sand, fragments of algae, the remains of plankton, dust washed from land, microscopic traces of seasons, storms, and distant blooming waters. You do not reach the floor yet. Instead, you hover above the point where wall and basin meet, and in that seam another community appears. Sea whips rise from the dim substrate, thin and flexible. Black corals, dark even in daylight, attached to harder pieces of rock where the water moves just enough. Sponges spread over the limestone blocks in pale crusts, orange muted now into rust and shadow. A slipper lobster, almost the color of stone, presses flat beneath an overhang. A hermit crab traverses the sediment below, carrying its borrowed shell with steady purpose, leaving a line that will soften and disappear. The basin is becoming quieter, but not poorer. It is simply exchanging one kind of abundance for another. The upper reef offered constant visible motion. This lower lagoon offers patience. You begin to sense that depth in Palau's southern lagoon is not a sudden drop into one uniform dark. It is a sequence of rooms, a terrace, a wall, a pocket of layered water, a dim shelf where jellies gather, a recess where fish wait for night. An open basin where the floor receives whatever the upper world lets go. That architecture matters because enclosed places create boundaries, and boundaries create specialized lives. A little farther down, the water cools again. The change is gentle, but the particles around you sharpen in the beamless dimness, as though the water itself has become clearer and darker at once. This often happens when you move below the more mixed upper layer into older, more stable water. Turbulence lessens. Suspended sediment may drop out. What remains is a cleaner but more isolated layer, one less connected to wind and surface. The consequence is immediate. The last obvious reef fish are gone. No quick flashes of yellow, no parrotfish scraping coral, no schools turning together. In their place are softer lives. A loose field of gelatinous plankton, a drifting chain of salps, each body pumping water through itself, linked in a transparent colony. Minute crustaceans flicking through the darkening column. These are the animals that thrive when the basin's rhythm changes from daylight bustle to suspended feeding. You could still turn upward from here and regain the brighter ledges without much effort. The wall above is visible enough. The route is clear, but the lower basin ahead has begun to show a second, stranger kind of order. One not written in rock alone. Across the water, just above the dim floor, there is a faint horizontal band. Not a line of light, but a line where the marine snow thickens and hangs. You drift toward it, slowly, because this is often how hidden layers announce themselves. Not with color, not with motion, with accumulation. A boundary in the water catches and holds the smallest things, and by holding them, it feeds whatever can tolerate the conditions there. As you approach, the smellless, tasteless sea seems to gain a texture all its own. The water feels denser on your skin, not heavy, just more settled, more private. In sheltered basins, especially where deep water exchange is limited, chemistry can become quietly stratified. Above, oxygen is replenished by contact with air and by photosynthesis in sunlit shallows. Below, sinking organic material is consumed by bacteria and other microbes. Their work releases nutrients back into the water, but it also uses oxygen. If the deep basin is renewed only rarely, then each layer begins to keep its own history. Here, that history is not visible as a map. It is visible as restraint. The water below the band seems to move less. The drifters within it pulse more slowly. Even sound feels as if it would travel there and not return. A few shrimps hang beneath the layer, their eyes catching a faint glint. Then one gives a tiny flash, whether startled or signaling, and vanishes into the dim. The band itself trembles with life too small to name individually. Bacteria, protists, minute plankton feeding on one another in a suspended field. These microbial communities are easy to forget when thinking of lagoons, because coral and fish are so much easier to love. But in deeper enclosed waters, microbes become central authors. They recycle falling matter. They reshape the chemistry. They form hazes and films and living gradients that larger animals navigate, exploit, or avoid. Because of them, the lagoon is not simply deeper here. It is older in its behavior, older water, older nutrients. Longer pauses between renewal. You let yourself sink until you are level with the band, and for a moment the entire basin seems divided into two thoughts. Above, a memory of the reef world. Below, a dark layer that no longer belongs fully to afternoon, or even to dusk. This is the first threshold that feels irreversible. Not because you cannot rise, you can, but because once you have seen the lagoon separate itself like this, you understand that the calm surface above has been covering a much more structured place than it appeared. And because you understand that, you stop thinking of depth as distance alone and begin to feel it as separation. The basin below you is not merely farther from the surface. It is governed by a different tempo. The water does not invite quick attention here. It asks for longer looking. You let yourself settle into that request and continue downward through the dim layered band. The change is gentle enough that it arrives first in the behavior of the smallest things. Above the boundary, particles drift in loose and wandering paths. Within it, they seem to hover, caught in a broad suspended field. Below it, the snow resumes its fall, but more slowly, as though the water has become careful with what it carries. That difference comes from density. When one layer of seawater is slightly saltier or slightly cooler than another, mixing can weaken. The boundary between them may be nearly invisible, yet it acts like a quiet membrane. Tiny fragments stall there. Microbes flourish there. Soft-bodied animals gather where food lingers, and larger creatures learn the shape of that invisible shelf just as surely as reef fish learn the edges of coral. You pass through with almost no motion at all. For a moment, the water feels satin smooth, then dimmer, then somehow more complete in its darkness. The limestone wall that had guided you begins to recede to your left, fading into a long grey presence rather than a clearly seen surface. Open water now fills most of your view. It is not empty. It is simply less willing to explain itself all at once. Marine snow becomes the main visible movement. Each speck is small, but together they create a downward weather of the lagoon. Bits of mucus from plankton, fragments of algae, broken shells, fecal pellets from tiny crustaceans above, the remains of things that lived near the light and have now entered the lower basin's slow economy. In enclosed tropical waters, that rain of matter matters very much. The upper lagoon produces life quickly. Sun warms the surface, phytoplankton bloom in pulses, reef communities feed, grow, spawn, shed, and excrete. Some of that production remains above. Some is eaten on the way down, but some always sinks. In basins where water exchange is limited, that sinking material becomes the deep layer's most reliable source of nourishment. It is the reason deep water can grow chemically distinct. It is also the reason life remains here, even after the corals have mostly vanished from view. A comb jelly rises in front of you, not from effort, but from the lift of its own cilia. The rows along its body catch what little ambient light remains, and shimmer in traveling color. Not true light of its own, not yet, just refraction, a moving line of rainbow within transparency. It passes with such little disturbance that the marine snow around it barely parts. That quiet style suits this depth. Bodies here are often made to interfere as little as possible. Gelatinous tissues, fine membranes, transparent muscles, shapes that are almost all water themselves. In a place where food can be sparse and movement costly, there is an advantage in being light and patient and nearly invisible. Another pulse appears farther off, then another. This time the light is certainly alive. Blue-green, brief, almost shy. Bioluminescence becomes easier to notice when the eye gives up searching for sunlight. Many small, deep-drifting animals carry the chemistry for it. A flash can startle a grazer, confuse a predator, signal distress, or simply result from contact, a cold spark produced by being touched in the dark. In sheltered lagoon water, these lights do not form a spectacle. They arrive singly. One point, then none. Then a second, lower and to the right. A language spoken in isolated syllables. You remain still, and because you do, more of the hidden layer reveals itself. A small cluster of transparent shrimp hangs beneath you. Their bodies are almost without color. Only the dark pin of an eye and the pale threads of antennae give them shape. One flexes backward in a single precise movement. Another turns and holds itself at a slight angle, as if balancing in a current too gentle to feel. They are not here by accident. Low-light basin layers often gather swarms of minute prey. Copepods and other zooplankton concentrate along density boundaries where particles linger. Shrimp can exploit that concentration. So can larval fishes. So can combed jellies and siphonophores and small squids that remain nearly unseen until they move. What looks quiet from a distance can be busy at a scale the eye must learn to accept. The water below continues to lose color. Blue gives way to gray. Gray to a charcoal softness. The transition is not sudden, because tropical water, clear in places and protected from stirred sediment, can transmit light farther than expected. But red disappeared long ago. Orange followed. Yellow has thinned to almost nothing. What remains is a fading monochrome in which shapes matter more than hues. That shift changes the value of light itself. Near the reef, color organizes the world. Down here, contrast does, glow does, outline does. A body that can erase its shadow has an advantage. A body that can create a sudden point of light has another. A body that can rest without moving at all may have the greatest advantage of all. Below you, a faint cloud forms, then dissolves, then forms again. At first it seems like silt, then you realize it is biological, a suspended veil of microbial abundance. In calm basins, especially where oxygen has begun to thin with depth, microbes may become visible not as individuals, but as texture, a haze, a milkiness, a slight opalescent change in the water where bacterial populations are especially dense. They are busy with what the upper lagoon sends down. Organic fragments settle into the deeper layer. Bacteria colonize them. Other microbes graze on those bacteria. Chemistry shifts as respiration consumes dissolved oxygen and recycles nutrients. The result is not a dramatic border, but a long, active conversation between sinking matter and still water. The basin is full of such conversations. They happen too slowly to hear, yet everything living here is shaped by them. Fish that need more oxygen remain above, or visit only briefly. Gelatinous drifters tolerate lower concentrations better. Microbial communities expand where they can. Even the smellless dark water seems to change personality, because chemistry changes what sorts of bodies can persist within it. You move lower, and a second consequence becomes clear. The wall, which had offered recesses and visible structure, can no longer guide your eye in the same way. Now orientation comes from layers, from falling particles, from the pale suggestion of the basin floor somewhere below. The descent feels less like following a slope and more like entering weather. Still underwater weather. Stacked, delicate, invisible until life outlines it. A chain of salps passes beside you. Each barrel-shaped body draws water through itself, filtering tiny food from the column. Together they form a living strand, linked and soft, moving as if the lagoon had threaded clear glass beads in the dark. Salps are part grazer, part vessel. They turn drifting abundance into motion. They also contribute, eventually, to the sediment below. Their fecal pellets sink efficiently. Their bodies, when they die, sink too. So even a transparent chain floating in mid-water is part of the basin floor's future. That is one of the deep lagoon's gentle truths. Nothing here is truly separate from anything else. The wall feeds the ledges. The ledges shelter resting fish. The upper reef sheds matter. The lower water transforms it. The bottom receives what remains. Then bottom dwellers recycle it again, returning dissolved nutrients that may one day rise and support new life near the surface. The system is quiet, but not static. Quiet does not mean stopped. It means spread out in time. A faint movement near the edge of sight draws your attention. This one is more deliberate than the drifting jellies. A small fish, slender and silver grey in the remaining light, appears below the microbial haze, then slips back into it. Not a bright reef fish, not one of the day-active species that belong to coral heads above. This animal is shaped for dim water. Large eyes, modest color, a body made for hovering and darting among sparse opportunities. It may spend daylight deeper, where fewer hunters patrol. It may rise later with the full night migration. For now it remains a brief witness, and then a suggestion. The deeper basin does that often. It gives you partial sightings, enough to know a life is present, not enough to possess it. That feels appropriate here. Enclosed lagoons can be studied with instruments, nets, cameras, and patient dives, yet their deeper layers always retain some reserve. Conditions change with rain, tide, season, temperature, and the amount of organic matter sinking from above. A certain animal may be common one month, then scarce the next. A layer may sharpen, then weaken. Oxygen may decline gradually at one depth and recover after renewal from the sea. So even in a known place, hidden water remains somewhat seasonal in its character. You are descending not into a fixed display, but into a living arrangement. The microbial veil grows more obvious now. It is not thick enough to obscure everything. Instead, it softens edges and gives the water a faint interior glowlessness, if such a thing can be said, a fullness of dim. Within it, tiny lights wink now and then, a dinoflagellate spark perhaps from disturbance, a shrimp's brief signal, a ctenophores edge catching and releasing a trace of brightness. The dark here is not blank, it is textured by events that last less than a second. You decide not to turn upward. The bright reef with its clear shapes and familiar motions would be easy enough to regain, but the lower layer has become the true question now. So you settle your pace even more. No chasing, no reaching ahead of the scene, just descent. That choice changes the scale of everything. The basin no longer feels like a place to cross quickly. It feels like a volume to inhabit. In that slower attention, new details emerge. A siphonophore trails downward through the dark, like a living thread of glass. It is not one creature in the simple sense. It is a colony, made of many specialized bodies working together as one drifting whole. Some parts capture prey, some digest, some reproduce, some pulse. Colonial life suits deep and dim waters in its own elegant way. Labor can be divided. Length can increase feeding area. Transparency can be maintained. The result looks delicate enough to vanish at a glance. Yet it is an accomplished design, ancient and efficient. Near it, a cluster of copepods flickers in and out of sight. These tiny crustaceans are among the great engines of marine systems. They graze microscopic producers above, they are eaten by larger drifters below, and they transport carbon downward in their own small bodies and pellets. Countless, restless, and usually overlooked, they knit together the upper brightness and lower dark. Without them, much of the deep lagoon's food chain would lose its thread. The water cools slightly again. Such changes in tropical lagoons may be small in absolute terms, but they matter. A degree, or even less, can help maintain stratification. Cooler, denser water tends to remain below warmer layers. If the basin is enclosed by sills or ridges that limit flushing, renewal may take time. That allows chemical signatures to build. Nutrients can accumulate, oxygen can diminish. Carbon dioxide from respiration can rise. Microbial processes can favor one group of organisms over another. The deep basin becomes, in effect, a quieter experiment in persistence. You are not entering a dead space. You are entering a selective one. This is why the visible community narrows. Species dependent on abundant oxygen or strong light fade from the scene. Species tolerant of dimness, stillness, and older water continue. Some are temporary visitors from above. Some are residents of the boundary itself. Some rise from lower layers only after full dark. The lagoon, rather than simply becoming poorer with depth, becomes more particular. A broad, dim shape appears beneath you at last. The basin floor is near enough to be sensed as a surface, though not yet fully defined. It does not look rocky from here. It looks soft, a pale floor of accumulated memory. Before you reach it, however, the open water fills once more with subtle life. A rain of tiny crustaceans thickens. A transparent lava twists in place, all oversized eyes and delicate appendages. A thin-bodied jelly pulses upward with no urgency at all. This is the night-facing plankton community beginning to gather. Many small animals spend brighter hours deeper down, then rise as light fades. This daily movement, called vertical migration, is one of the ocean's oldest rhythms. In open sea, it can span hundreds of meters. Inside a sheltered lagoon basin, the distances may be shorter, but the pattern remains. Light weakens. Risk changes. Food near the upper layers becomes worth approaching. And so, every evening, countless tiny bodies begin to move. You are meeting the beginning of that tide, not its fullest expression yet, only its first loosening. The fish that feed by sight above are losing their advantage. The shadows are evening out. Plankton that stayed deeper through the day can ascend with less danger. Shrimp follow, small squid follow, some fishes follow them. In this way, the lower basin is not sealed off from the upper lagoon. It breathes into it each night by way of migration. This matters because it prevents the deep from becoming an isolated chamber. Even where chemistry separates layers, living bodies still travel. They carry carbon, energy, and nutrients upward and downward. They link microbial water to fish-rich shallows. They make the basin part of a wider cycle. A particularly bright flash blooms a little below your right hand, then vanishes. This one leaves a faint afterimage. You wait, and a second flash appears nearby. A shrimp again, or perhaps a small ostracod, one of the tiny crustaceans known in some seas for patterned blue light. Not all bioluminescence serves the same purpose. Some signals are warnings. Some are mating cues, some are decoys, some are simple chemical consequences of disturbance. In darkness, a flash can be both message and mistake, attracting one animal while repelling another. The deep lagoon's language is therefore not a single code. It is overlapping private systems, each read differently by different eyes. You continue downward, and the marine snow becomes visibly denser the nearer you come to the floor. This is not because more is being made here. It is because the basin receives what the whole upper lagoon relinquishes. Some particles sink steadily. Some clump together into larger aggregates bound by mucus from plankton or bacteria. These marine snowflakes may carry concentrated nutrition compared with the water around them. To a tiny grazer, one aggregate can be a meal. To microbes, it can be a temporary island. As the aggregate falls, it is colonized, chewed, reshaped, and partly dissolved. By the time it reaches the bottom, it may be smaller than when it began. Or it may have grown by colliding with other drifting particles on the way down. Nothing falls unchanged. Below and to the left, the wall returns briefly, not as a towering face now, but as a lower outcrop edging into the basin. You drift toward it instinctively. Stone still offers a kind of orientation that open water does not, and as soon as you near it, life changes again. Sponges coat the rock in thick, quiet folds. Some are vase-shaped. Some spread as crusts. Some form low chimneys filtering water continuously. They do not require sunlight. They require flow, even a gentle one, and suspended food small enough to capture. In deeper, dim settings, sponges often become more prominent because they are such patient users of what the water already contains. A black coral branch rises from a hard point on the outcrop. In daylight, it would not look black so much as deep brown or muted gold, depending on the species, but here it appears almost ink dark against the basin gloom. Unlike the branching corals of the shallows, black corals are not reef builders in the same obvious way. They do not need full tropical light to host symbiotic algae. They can thrive in deeper, darker water, feeding on particles and plankton passing by. Their presence marks another step away from the sun-governed reef. The rock also holds hidden residents. A brittle star extends several narrow arms from beneath a sponge lip, tasting the water. A small crab, pale and powdery with sediment, backs into a recess when your gaze finds it. Two cardinal fish hover in a pocket where the outcrop curves inward, their bodies little more than silver slivers now. These are the wall people of the lower lagoon, not abundant in the showy way of shallow reefs, abundant in niches, each ledge occupied according to current, shadow, and available cover. This is why the drowned karst history of Palau remains so important even here. If the basin were smooth rock or only mud, many of these resting and suspension-feeding communities would be fewer. But flooded limestone carries old landforms into the sea. Rain-made hollows become fish shelters. Solution pits become crustacean recesses. Undercut ledges become sponge gardens. Geology shapes pause points. Pause points shape life. You follow the outcrop along its edge, and it leads you into a deeper notch. The basin floor drops a little farther there. The water grows even more settled. The microbial haze thickens for several body lengths, then thins again, as though the notch is holding a slight pocket of older water within older water. This can happen where basin topography creates weak internal trapping. A sill, a lip, a depression, all can affect how dense water settles and how much mixing reaches it. In still marine basins, small differences in shape can matter greatly over time. A hollow only a little deeper may accumulate finer sediment. A recess less often brushed by renewal may host lower oxygen. Animals respond accordingly. You do not need instruments to sense all of this. The water tells you in gentler ways. Less fish, more gelatinous bodies, more microbial softness, fewer hard outlines, more patient forms. A shrimp drifts upside down beneath the notched ceiling. Its legs pick delicately at the water, seizing what the eye cannot see. The habit looks almost contemplative, yet it is precise feeding in a landscape where small opportunities matter. Below it, a feather star clings to stone, arms furled. If current strengthens later, it may open like a slow flower and filter the passing water. For now it remains folded, conserving effort. Conservation is part of the mood of this depth. Not fear, not scarcity in a harsh sense, simply thrift. Nothing sudden, nothing wasted. As you leave the notch, the open basin returns once more. Now true darkness is close. Not total, but close enough that the remaining light from above has become only a diluted memory. Here, bioluminescence begins to separate from imagination more clearly. A vertical line of blue sparks appears for an instant, then is gone. Something has disturbed a cluster of luminous plankton. A faint green point moves horizontally and holds. An animal carrying its own light. Farther off, a softer pulse repeats twice, at measured intervals. A signal of some kind, perhaps courtship, perhaps species recognition, perhaps a simple reflex that means nothing outside the body that made it. The effect is gentle rather than dramatic. The basin is not blazing. It is whispering. You remain suspended, and the nightly rising begins in earnest. At first it is just an increase in density. More shrimp, more larvae, more copepods and arrowworms and tiny drifting bodies too small to classify by sight. Then larger silhouettes appear among them. Slender fish with big eyes, a translucent squid no longer solitary. They do not rush. They simply arrive, as if the darkness itself has begun to grow fins and eyes. A small school forms beneath you, loose and unhurried, each fish keeping a little space around its body. Their sides do not throw back bright reef colors now. They hold only dim silver and the occasional cold blink from a reflective scale. Large eyes matter here. In low light, every spare photon becomes useful. Many night-rising fishes invest in vision that can gather what the day-active reef fishes no longer need. Their pupils seem almost too wide for their heads. Their movements are careful because careful movement wastes less energy and reveals less. You stay still among them. That choice matters. If you drift too quickly, the procession breaks apart. If you remain calm, the basin resumes speaking in its own pace. Around you, the water fills with migrants. Some have come only a little way up from deeper pockets within the lagoon. Some may have entered from beyond the lagoon edge, crossing sills and channels in the open dark. Palau's southern lagoon is sheltered, but it is not sealed. Its basins breathe through passes and deeper connections with the sea. Water from outside can enter. Larvae from outside can drift in. Night-active animals can cross those boundaries more easily than daylight suggests. So the growing company around you is partly local and partly borrowed. This is the gentle surprise of enclosed waters. They seem private by day. At night they become more porous. A ribbon-bodied larval fish hangs nearly vertical, then tilts and rises. Its body is transparent, except for the head, the eye, and a faint silver line of organs. Larval forms often look less like their future selves than like dreams of them. Many marine animals begin as drifters. Their early lives are spent in suspension, carried by currents and boundaries, feeding where they can. A sheltered lagoon can trap some of these drifting young for a time. Its layered waters slow them. Its calm basins keep them near, Some will settle onto reefs when they are ready. Some will leave the lagoon with the tide. Some will not survive at all. But for this evening, they are here, part of the upward tide. You begin to see how migration changes the emotional shape of the basin. Before, the deeper water felt selective and inward. Now it feels connected. Not bright, not crowded in any noisy sense, but threaded into a larger ocean rhythm. When the sun falls, countless marine animals move. They rise to feed on the more productive upper layers where phytoplankton and small grazers are most available. Then, before dawn, many sink again. This is called diel vertical migration, a daily movement timed mostly by light. It is one of the largest recurring animal movements on Earth. Even here, among Palau's drowned limestone pockets and enclosed basins, the same old rhythm continues. A deep lagoon does not invent a separate ocean. It interprets the ocean in a smaller room. The migrants around you are evidence of that. A transparent squid turns nearby, and this time you can see another behind it. Then another. Their bodies are clear enough that the darker water shows through them. Only the eyes and a slight opalescent line along the mantle reveal their outlines. They hover with minute adjustments, not unlike the shrimps, but with more intention in every turn. Small squids often join these nightly ascents to feed on zooplankton and tiny fishes. The fading light reduces the advantage of predators that hunt by sight. The dark does not make feeding safe exactly, but it makes it fairer. And fairness in the ocean is often enough. One squid extends its feeding arms in a quick, soft gesture, then folds them back. No chase follows. Whatever it caught was too small to notice. That is the way much of this migration works. Tiny captures, tiny decisions, an immense movement built from nearly invisible meals. Below you, a faint string of points appears. At first they seem random. Then you recognize the shape of a siphonophore, longer now than the ones above, drifting vertically with its feeding structures extended. It is another colonial body, another shared life made of specialized parts. Night favors such designs. A long, transparent colony can spread a feeding net through richer layers without needing speed. The particles and plankton rise. The colony need only be in the right place. In a basin where current is weak and motion is costly, patience can be a successful form of intelligence. The water is full of these strategies. You are surrounded by lives that trust slow opportunity. Some shrimp flash when they dart. Some do not. Some fishes keep their sides plain. Others show mirrored scales that make their bodies harder to track from below. Some animals rise only partway, pausing at a certain depth, as if obeying a boundary you cannot see. That is because they are obeying one. Light still penetrates unevenly through the basin. Temperature and density still shape where water layers meet. Oxygen may be a little richer above, a little thinner below. Food may gather at one suspended level, then disperse above it. Every animal here is balancing those conditions. The migration is not a single upward river. It is a stack of partial ascents. One small fish remains below the main cloud, feeding at the lower edge where the microbial veil softens the dark. Another ventures higher and returns. A comb jelly drifts through all of it with perfect indifference, harvesting what touches its tentacles. The lagoon contains many different ideas of enough. You follow none of them. You remain suspended. This is your second quiet decision. The first was to leave the terrace. The next was to pass through the stratified boundary. Now you choose not to chase the migrants upward and not to sink away from them either. You stay where their path crosses your stillness. Because of that, the migration begins to feel less like spectacle and more like weather. Bodies pass, density builds, then loosens. A zone of feeding gathers around you, then shifts a little higher. No single animal explains it. The explanation is collective. An hour like this changes the whole basin. Marine snow is intercepted. Tiny grazers are thinned. Predators from lower water take their share. Some waste sinks back down in smaller, more compact pellets. Some carbon is carried upward inside living tissue, then returned downward before dawn. Every night, the basin is quietly rearranged by hunger, gentle enough to look like drifting. This is one of the ocean's patient engines. A larger silhouette appears at the edge of your sight and holds. It is still only modest in size, but compared with the tiny bodies around it, it seems substantial, long and narrow. A fish shaped for dim pelagic water rather than coral shelter. Its jaw catches a little glint. For a moment you think of lanternfishes from the wider sea, those small oceanic migrants famous for their nightly rise. Whether this individual belongs to a true lanternfish line or to a similar night-feeding form using the lagoon margins, the effect is the same. The deeper water has opened a corridor to the outer ocean style of life. Palau's lagoon is ringed and broken by reefs and islands, but its night does not stop at local species alone. Some visitors can enter and leave on the scale of darkness. That broadens the story beneath you. What lives in the lagoon depths is not only what resides there all day, it is also what passes through, what feeds there briefly, what uses the basin as a sheltered station within a larger seascape. A transparent shrimp rides close beside the larger fish for a moment, then drops away. Above, a cloud of copepods flickers like dust in a shaft of absent light. The fish rises into them, turns, and vanishes upward. Its visit lasts only seconds, but its presence lingers in your thoughts. The basin no longer feels hidden because it is sealed. It feels hidden because its busiest exchanges happen in darkness and in soft motion and without witness. That is a different kind of secrecy, not defended, simply timed. Many natural places are like this. An alpine meadow changes most subtly at dusk. A desert washes its heat upward after sunset. A cave stream shifts when rain falls days away. And here, in a tropical lagoon basin below the rock islands, life gathers most fully when the light has almost gone. Darkness is not an ending for this place. It is a door. It opens each night. A scatter of tiny blue sparks flares far below, then another to your left. Then two more around a moving shape too small to identify. Bioluminescent flashes become more frequent now, not because the basin has changed all at once, but because the eye has adjusted, and because more bodies are touching one another in the dim. Each contact can trigger chemistry. Each pursuit can leave a brief constellation behind it, yet even now the darkness remains spacious. Nothing crowds you. The flashes are separated by stillness. That spacing matters. It keeps the mood of the basin calm and helps you understand how much empty water still surrounds every living thing. The ocean, even in motion, is generous with distance. A chain of salps drifts upward at an angle, filtering steadily. An arrow worm hangs just below them, transparent and almost severe in its simplicity, waiting to seize smaller plankton. Arrow worms are among the quiet hunters of the planktonic world. They do not advertise themselves. They do not build homes. They suspend and strike. In a nightly rise like this, they have much to choose from. Predation here is efficient, almost abstract. No struggle lasts long enough to disturb the larger peace. The tide of bodies continues. You might expect the migrants to darken the whole water with abundance. Instead, they appear in pockets and sheets, distributed by microcurrents and boundaries the eye senses only through their arrangement. One layer thickens with tiny crustaceans, another holds more gelatinous animals. A level below that carries fish shapes passing singly or in loose groups. These distinctions emerge because the water itself is not uniform. Even as darkness smooths the visible world, the lagoon remains layered in salinity, oxygen, temperature, and the density of prey. Those invisible structures guide the nightly ascent the way trails guide animals on land. Not every path needs a roadbed. Some are written in repeated use, some are written in physics. You watch a cluster of shrimps hold to a particular level, their bodies tilted slightly upward, as if climbing a slow, invisible slope. They do not continue, they remain there, feeding and flashing once in a while. This likely marks a narrow band where prey is concentrated, perhaps near a weak density boundary or particle-rich layer. A few body lengths above them, A school of larger-eyed fish circles loosely, taking advantage of the same concentration. Night feeding in the water column often works like this. Invisible boundaries become dining rooms. The table is set by stratification. The guests arrive according to their needs. You think again of the lagoon's drowned architecture. On land, before sea level rose, rain shaped these limestones into hollows and ridges. Now those old shapes hold layered water, and layered water holds plankton, and plankton draws fish, squid, shrimps, and colonial drifters. Ancient geology decides tonight's meal. That long chain of cause and effect is part of what makes this place feel so old. Not just old in rock, but old in process. One event resting inside another. Rain in the past, shaping darkness in the present. The migration thickens for a while, then steadies. That change tells you another useful thing. The rise is not limitless. At some point, most animals stop where the balance suits them. They need enough darkness to reduce risk. They need enough prey to make feeding worthwhile. They need enough oxygen to sustain their activity. They may also need to avoid the brightest, near-surface layers where night-hunting predators still patrol. So what feels at first like a general ascent resolves into a settled field of chosen depths. You are in the middle of that field now. Above, more life moves than before. Below, the floor is faint but waiting. You could rise with the migrants and follow their feeding higher into the basin. You could remain here until the cloud thins, or you could continue the original descent and let the migration pass over you like weather. You choose the downward path again. It feels natural. The question you brought beneath the rock islands was never only about passing visitors. It was about the lagoon's hidden depths themselves. So you let the nightly procession continue above your shoulders and sink below it by slow degrees. As soon as you do, the soundless bustle softens, not instantly. For a while, shrimps and tiny fishes still cross your path, but the density begins to drop. A few jellies linger lower than the main movement. One squid passes down past you, perhaps finished feeding for the moment, perhaps simply choosing a different layer. The bioluminescent flashes spread farther apart again. Darkness regains its larger intervals. This is the consequence of not joining the rise. The basin reclaims its emptiness, though emptiness is never quite the right word. What returns is spaciousness. Below the principal migration zone, life becomes rarer, slower, and more solitary again. Marine snow resumes its rule over visible motion. The particles are larger near the floor now, or seem so because they are backlit by the pale dimness beneath. Some fall straight, some drift sideways in weak internal movement. A few aggregate into soft, irregular clumps, little packages of carbon and memory settling toward the bottom. This lower water receives what the upper migration leaves behind. Fecal pellets descend, discarded mucus houses from planktonic grazers descend, dead cells and broken appendages descend, even failed hunts descend. The basin floor is fed not only by the daylit reef above, but by the dark feeding hour now receding over your head. It is always being written to by the layers above it. You begin to make out the bottom with more certainty. Not a hard plane, not bare stone, but a soft, broad floor broken by gentle undulations, pale mud, fine carbonate grains. Shell fragments small as sand, the accumulated remains of reef life, plankton life, and land-derived dust, all sorted by gravity and time. In a sheltered lagoon basin like this, sediment is both pantry and archive. It stores food for benthic animals. It stores chemical traces of old water conditions. It stores the record of storms, bloom years, calm years, changing sea level, changing reef production, and particles washed from nearby islands. If a core were taken here and the layers read carefully, the lagoon would tell a long story. But tonight you do not read with instruments. You read with presence. The bottom comes closer. Its stillness has a different quality from the stillness of open water. Open water stillness is suspension. Bottom stillness is settlement. The difference matters. Above, everything was in negotiation with depth. Here, things have arrived You stop a little short of the floor and let yourself hover. It is enough. The sediment beneath you is so fine that any quick movement would cloud it, and that would erase what little the basin is willing to show. In the pale dimness, the first bottom residents become visible. At first, they seem like marks. A line across the mud, a small mound, a faint star shape. Then your eye adjusts. The line is a feeding trail. The mound is a burrow opening. The star shape is a brittle star resting with arms spread lightly over the sediment. Bottom life in quiet lagoons rarely announces itself with drama. It writes in traces. A sea cucumber lies ahead, almost the same color as the sediment around it. Its body is thick and soft, and the skin looks dusted with pale grains. It moves so slowly that motion is perceptible only over time. Sea cucumbers are among the patient workers of the seabed. They take in sediment, extract organic matter and microbes from it, and pass the cleaned material behind them. In doing so, they turn the uppermost layer of the floor, recycling what has fallen. Where you might see only mud, they find a meal distributed grain by grain. A little farther on, a second sea cucumber has left a subtle processed ribbon behind it, smoother than the surrounding surface. That ribbon is evidence of feeding and of transformation. The basin does not simply collect, it digests. This is the science of soft bottoms everywhere, from shallow bays to abyssal plains. Organic material falls from the water above. Microbes colonize it. Benthic animals consume the enriched sediment or the microbes within it. Predators feed on those benthic animals. Burrowers mix oxygen a little deeper into the upper sediment. Chemistry shifts from millimeter to millimeter. What looks flat from a distance becomes complex at close range. Palau's deep lagoon floor is no exception. It is a quiet workshop. You drift a little lower, careful not to disturb anything. The brittle star ahead lifts one arm and lowers it again. Its central disk is half buried, using the sediment for stability and concealment. Brittle stars are echinoderms, relatives of sea stars and sea cucumbers, but built for a different style of life. Many scavenge, many suspension feed. Some in soft-bottom habitats spread their arms to intercept edible particles drifting just above the floor. Others move over the sediment, searching for small organic fragments. Their flexibility suits uncertain food. Their low profile suits still water. To your right, a tiny crab emerges from a shallow depression, hesitates, and begins a diagonal walk across the mud. Its legs leave fine paired marks that remain intact because almost nothing here disturbs them. No wave reaches this depth, no surf rearranges the grains, only the slow touch of currents, the crawl of animals, and the rain from above rewrite the surface. That is why sediment plains preserve so much detail. A footprint, if you can call it that, may last a surprising while. A burrow entrance may hold its neat rim until another animal crosses it. A feeding track becomes a sentence written on paper no wind can reach. The basin floor teaches you to look for handwriting instead of bodies. A pale worm casts a thread of sediment from the mouth of its burrow. You would not have seen the worm itself if the cast had not appeared. Burrowing worms are among the great engineers of marine mud. Some feed by swallowing sediment below the surface. Some extend tentacles over the bottom and draw particles back to the burrow. Some irrigate their tunnels with the water above, bringing oxygen downward and changing the chemistry around them. Each tunnel becomes a little interface between water and earth. In enclosed basins where oxygen near the bottom may already be reduced compared with shallow reef water, such burrows matter even more. They create patches of alteration, tiny oxygenated halos, narrow zones where microbial communities differ from the sediment around them. The floor is alive in gradients and plumbing. A faint pale film coats some areas of the mud. Not everywhere, just in patches. This may be bacterial growth feeding on organic enrichment near the surface. Bacteria are as important down here as they were in the suspended veil above. Only now their work is partly written into the sediment itself. They break down falling organic matter. They cycle nitrogen and sulfur in microscopically thin zones. They influence which animals can live where, because chemistry near the sediment-water boundary can change quickly over tiny distances. In some sheltered tropical basins, the uppermost mud may remain oxygenated only in the first thin layer, especially where organic input is steady and water renewal is limited. Below that, other forms of respiration take over. That invisible vertical chemistry shapes the entire community. What lives on the floor depends not only on what falls there, but on how fast microbes use oxygen while processing it. You can almost feel the basin's patience in this. Food arrives slowly. Decomposition proceeds slowly. Layer builds on layer. A fraction is eaten. A fraction is preserved. A fraction is dissolved back into the water, where currents may one day carry it upward again. The lagoon keeps very little for itself forever. It transforms instead. A second brittle star lies partly beneath a shell fragment, only the arm tips visible. Nearby, a narrow furrow curves across the mud, then disappears into a low ridge of settled grains. You follow it with your eyes, and the floor begins to reveal itself as a place of intent, not accident. Each line is a meal taken. Each mound is sediment lifted and dropped. Each opening in the seabed is an address, a small exchange point between the water above and the earth below. In shallow places, movement can erase these details quickly. Here, in the protected basin, they linger. That is one reason quiet lagoon floors are such faithful record keepers, not only in the deep layers that build over centuries, but in the temporary script written fresh each night. A brittle star's path, a crab's angled crossing, a sea cucumber's broad processed ribbon, a worm's cast, curled like a tiny plume laid gently on the surface. The marks overlap, but they do not crowd one another. Space remains between them. The basin floor still feels spare. That sparseness is honest. Soft-bottom communities often live by thin income. They rely on what sinks from above, and what falls is enough, but rarely lavish in one place for very long. So animals spread out. They graze slowly, they burrow, they wait. They make use of the sediment itself, because the sediment is where the lagoon's reign of organic matter finally comes to rest. You ease a little farther forward, still just above the mud, and a new pattern appears. Tiny paired dimples form a dotted trail, leading to a shell fragment partly buried in the bottom. Under its curved edge, something pale and delicate shifts. A small shrimp, nearly the color of the sediment, backs deeper under cover. Even here, on an open floor, structure matters. A broken shell, a bit of limestone rubble, a fragment of dead coral carried down long ago. Any hard object creates shade, shelter, and a different little flow of water around it. That can be enough to gather a new set of residents. A shell catches drifting particles. Its underside stays darker, calmer, and safer. Its upper surface may host a dusting of microbes or tiny encrusting life. So one fragment becomes several habitats at once. This is how the deep basin keeps making variety from small things. At the edge of a slightly firmer patch, several thin arms protrude from the mud like black threads. At first, they seem like plant stems, though nothing rooted is growing here in the ordinary sense. Then, one arm coils slowly, and you understand that these are the arms of a buried, brittle star, the body hidden below the surface, while only the feeding structures remain exposed. That strategy suits a place where food often arrives as particles drifting just above the bottom. Stay buried, extend only what is needed, gather what the water offers, spend little. In a lower lagoon basin, this kind of economy is as elegant as any coral reef color. The sediment itself changes from one body length to the next. Some patches are smoother and finer, almost silky in the dimness. Others are peppered with shell grit, tiny carbonate fragments that catch what little light remains and turn it pale. This sorting tells you about water movement that is too weak to feel directly. Even quiet basins have internal currents, not waves, not surf, but slow repositioning. Dense water sliding along the floor, tidal breathing through distant passages, minute bottom flows shaped by the basin's contours, Over long periods, those weak motions help separate finer grains from coarser ones. They also influence where organic matter accumulates most easily, so the floor is not one uniform blanket. It is a map of settling, a map of what could stay and what could not. In places where the sediment is finer and darker, the organic content may be a little richer. That invites deposit feeders. Where the grains are coarser, oxygen may penetrate slightly deeper between them. That can favor a different set of burrowers and microbes. Even on the scale of a few feet, the basin floor creates choices. Life answers those choices quietly. A small sea cucumber arches over a patch of mud and feeds with complete patience. Its mouthparts work steadily, taking in the surface film grain by grain. Many sea cucumbers are selective at a very fine level. They do not simply swallow whatever lies before them. They often favor the uppermost enriched layer where microbes and organic particles are most concentrated. That top skin of sediment is the seabed's active edge, the place where falling matter first meets bacterial work and where a little oxygen from the water above still reaches. To feed there is to feed at the interface of two worlds. The sea cucumber leaves behind sediment that has already been processed once. Its trail is not waste in any simple sense. It is altered ground, more sifted, a little changed in texture, a record that nourishment has passed this way. You begin to notice how many of the floor's residents are really editors. They do not create the material they use, they revise it, worms sort it, sea cucumbers sift it, bacteria dismantle it. Tiny crustaceans pick through what remains. The basin is a manuscript written first in the upper lagoon and revised here at depth. And because so much of what settles comes from coral reefs, plankton blooms, algae, and forested islands above, the mud below contains traces of several landscapes at once. The reef sends carbonate grains and shell fragments. The water column sends plankton remains and marine snow. The islands may send pollen, dust, and the washed-down residue of rain. Each source leaves a different kind of sentence. In enclosed basins like this, those sentences can stay layered in order for a long time. That is why scientists treasure quiet sediments. A core drawn upward from the floor can carry centuries of weather and water history. Thin pale bands may mark periods when carbonate production above was especially strong. Darker layers may indicate richer organic deposition. Microscopic fossils can reveal which plankton were common and when. Pollen grains from nearby vegetation can drift in and settle, preserving hints of conditions on land. Even changes in the chemistry locked into shells or sediments can point to shifts in rainfall, sea temperature, or lagoon circulation. All of that rests beneath you now, invisible in detail, but present. The mud is not just where life feeds, it is where time gathers. A fresh scatter of marine snow descends through the dim and settles on the floor like a second, finer weather. You can watch the beginning of preservation happen in real time. A particle lands, then another. A tiny clump catches on a brittle star arm, then slips free and falls again. Much of what arrives will be eaten within hours or days. Some will be mixed downward by burrowing animals. Some will be broken apart by microbes until only dissolved compounds remain. But a small fraction, especially in a quiet basin with steady accumulation, will be buried faster than it can be fully erased. That buried fraction becomes history. This is one of the lagoon's gentlest secrets. The bottom is always receiving the last soft version of the worlds above. A delicate groove leads into a circular hole with a neat raised rim. The geometry is too regular to be chance. Something below has pushed sediment outward and maintains the entrance from within. Perhaps a worm, perhaps a small crustacean, perhaps a goby-like fish in shallower settings, though here, in the darker basin, the builders are more likely invertebrate and hidden. Burrows are among the most important structures in marine soft bottoms. They ventilate the sediment, they let water-carrying oxygen and dissolved nutrients move below the surface. They create walls coated in different microbes than the mud around them. Predators may patrol the openings. Scavengers may use abandoned tunnels. A single burrow changes far more than the whole you see. It creates a small underground geography. In oxygen-poor or slowly renewed deep water, that underground geography becomes even more important. The upper few millimeters of mud may be the most livable. Below that, chemistry can shift quickly. Oxygen is consumed by bacteria as they process the steady rain of organic matter. Then, deeper down, other microbial pathways take over. Nitrate, manganese, iron, sulfate. These are not names the basin needs you to memorize. What matters is the pattern. As oxygen runs out below the surface, different microbes continue the work of decomposition using other compounds. Those reactions change the color, smell, and texture of the sediment, though here, in the water, you sense them mostly through their ecological consequences. Some animals can tolerate shallower oxygenated layers only. Some bring oxygen downward through their burrows. Some stay on the surface and never risk deeper mud at all. The floor becomes a vertical mosaic, one layer resting just above another. A tiny white thread, almost invisible, stretches from a burrow mouth over the surface and gathers a few settling particles. A feeding tentacle. It retracts so slowly that its movement is more inferred than seen. Many bottom animals live concealed, extending only narrow collecting structures into the open. That allows them to feed while keeping most of their body protected. On a quiet basin floor, where disturbances are infrequent and food arrives diffusely, this can be a very successful life. No speed required. No territory to defend, just a dependable opening, a chemistry you can tolerate, and the patience to harvest what comes. To your left, a low hummock rises from the mud with a scatter of shell grit on its crest. It may have formed around buried rubble, or perhaps it is simply a place where slightly coarser material accumulated while finer mud settled elsewhere. Even these small lifts in the floor affect life. Current can accelerate a little over a rise. Particles may settle differently on its sheltered side. A burrow on top may receive better ventilation than one in a depression. The basin plain is not dramatic, but it is not featureless. Its relief is subtle enough that you have to let your eye become slow. When you do, the floor begins to look almost hilly, a miniature landscape of drifts, rims, trails, and shell banks. A small crab pauses beside one of those low rises and lifts itself higher on its legs. For a moment, it is perfectly still. Then it bends forward and picks delicately at the sediment. Crabs in soft bottom settings are often opportunists. Some scavenge. Some hunt small infaunal animals that live within the mud. Some graze films or organic debris. On a basin floor like this, a little versatility helps. Food is not arranged in obvious patches. It is hidden in burrows, dispersed as films, caught in shell fragments, or freshly settled from above. A generalist can make use of all of it. The crab lowers itself again and continues across the plain, leaving faint punctuation marks in the sediment behind it. You do not follow the animal, you follow the evidence it leaves. That feels more appropriate here. The deep lagoon rarely presents whole explanations. It presents clues. A processed ribbon means a sea cucumber fed here. A raised rim means a burrow is active below. A little fan of clean sediment may indicate a worm has been excavating. A cluster of shell fragments gathered on one side of a ripple-like rise may tell of a weak bottom current sorting lighter and heavier grains over time. Read together. These clues describe a living floor without requiring every resident to step into view. That is enough. Above you, the migration has thinned further. Only occasional drifting lights and scattered silhouettes cross the darkness now. Most of the nightly feeding tide is working at levels higher in the basin. Down here, the dominant rhythm belongs again to settling. The pace has changed from suspended movement to contact. This is the level where the lagoon's visitors become the seabed's provisions. A pellet sinks, a fragment lands, a body dies somewhere above and begins a final descent. Nothing dramatic follows. The floor receives. In the quiet of enclosed basins, receiving is a major ecological role. A thin, brittle star arm stirs, and a tiny cloud of the finest sediment lifts from the surface before settling again. Even that small movement changes what nearby microbes and deposit feeders can reach. Sediment disturbance, called bioturbation when animals do it, is one of the key processes shaping soft bottoms. Burrowing, feeding, crawling, and irrigating all mix the upper layers. This moves organic material downward and brings buried compounds upward. It also blurs the annual or seasonal layering right at the surface, while deeper undisturbed layers preserve older records below. So there is a gentle tension in the mud. Life disturbs, time records. The very animals that depend on settled history also partly rewrite it. That is why some basin records are clearer in one place than another. A floor heavily churned by benthic life may smear certain signals near the top. A quieter patch with finer sediment and less mixing may keep thinner, more distinct bands. The shape of the basin matters. The input of organic matter matters. Even the depth of the sill connecting the basin to the wider lagoon matters, because renewal affects chemistry, and chemistry affects animals, and animals affect the archive. All of these threads meet under you in the same mud. A little farther ahead, the sediment changes color very slightly, pale tan giving way to a grayer tone. The shift is modest, but in this dim world it stands out. Perhaps organic matter has accumulated more thickly in this slight depression. Perhaps the texture is finer. Perhaps a recent pulse of settled material from above has not yet been fully processed. The floor is always uneven in time as well as space. One patch may have received a fresh dusting from a bloom. Another may be older and more thoroughly worked over. A depression may trap more particles than a rise. So no single square of mud can speak for the entire basin. The bottom is a field of local stories. That thought belongs naturally to Palau. The rock islands above are a maze. They create sheltered pockets, narrow channels, drowned valleys, and unevenly flushed hollows. The deeper floor inherits that same patchwork quality. Even within one lagoon, some basins renew more easily than others. Some collect finer sediment. Some experience stronger stratification. Some host deeper, low-oxygen layers during certain seasons. And because of those differences, life on the floor can vary from basin to basin in quiet but important ways. What you see here is one expression of the lagoon's hidden interior, not all of it. A small, elongated fish appears briefly just above the bottom, hovering so close to the mud that its outline blurs. Then it darts forward and settles again. Its coloration is subdued, exactly what this depth rewards. Bottom-associated fishes in deep sheltered basins often depend more on camouflage, stillness, and sensitivity than on bright display. They may feed on worms, small crustaceans, or whatever stirs near the surface layer of the sediment. Even when they are present, they keep the calm of the place intact. No rushing schools, no reef turbulence, only sudden small motions followed by long pauses. You drift over a shell fragment large enough to cast a real shadow in the dimness. Its edges are softened by time, and a dusting of fine sediment has collected inside its curve. This fragment may have belonged to a mollusk that lived in the lagoon years ago, perhaps in shallower water, perhaps on a nearby slope. Broken, carried, settled, and slowly buried, it has become both habitat and archive. Its surface chemistry can preserve environmental information. Its cavity shelters a tiny worm or crustacean. Its carbonate came originally from a body built out of dissolved minerals taken from seawater. So even a single shell is a complete loop. Water into life, life into fragment, fragment into floor, floor into future rock, perhaps if buried deeply enough and left undisturbed for long geologic time. The lagoon is still making limestone in pieces, though the process is patient. Patience may be the truest quality here. Not emptiness, not isolation. Patience. The islands above were shaped slowly by rain. The basins were flooded slowly by rising seas. The water layers settled and differentiated over time. The nightly migration repeats in old rhythm. The floor receives, mixes, stores, and remembers without haste. Nothing needs to be hurried at this depth. That is why the basin feels so restful. It is not because nothing happens, it is because everything happens on scales the body can release itself into. A low, sinuous track crosses the sediment and vanishes beneath a mound. Perhaps a worm fed and retreated. Perhaps a small holothurian, another sea cucumber, passed here earlier and is now hidden in a depression. When animals feed on soft bottoms, they often reveal more than they show. A sea cucumber's trail can persist after the animal is gone. A burrow opening can remain active while its owner stays deep below. A ripple of recently disturbed sediment may tell you that something passed within the last hour. The basin offers aftermath as one of its main forms of evidence. That seems fitting for a place that stores what has already happened. The science of enclosed lagoon sediments depends on this same principle. Scientists seldom witness the exact moment a storm plume settles, or a bloom ends, or a season of heavy rainfall delivers extra material into the basin. Instead, they read the aftermath. A new layer, a change in grain size, a shift in organic content, microscopic fossils that become more or less common, chemical fingerprints of oxygen levels, productivity or water renewal. From aftermath, a story is reconstructed. From aftermath, old climates and lagoon histories emerge. The deep floor is therefore both ecological present and geological memory at once. You hover over a small cluster of brittle stars, arranged several body lengths apart. Their spacing suggests that food, though present, is not concentrated enough for crowding. Each animal holds a little feeding territory, not defended in any visible way, but respected by economics. Too close together, and each would intercept less. Spread out, and each samples its own narrow halo of drifting particles and enriched surface sediment. Even still, animals can reveal invisible competition. A faint shimmer passes over the bottom as a higher layer of water shifts almost imperceptibly. The sediment does not move, but a few suspended particles just above it drift to one side and a brittle star arm responds. This is the kind of current the deeper floor receives. Not enough to sculpt dunes or scour channels, enough to redistribute the smallest things, enough to decide where a suspension feeder extends its arms, enough to carry oxygen into one burrow opening and not another, enough to make one shell fragment a richer feeding point than the mud beside it. The quietest current can matter greatly where life works close to the edge of abundance. Farther ahead, the floor lifts toward a scattered zone of limestone rubble, fallen long ago from a slope or ledge above. The pieces are irregular, pale, and partly sunk into the mud. This transition from open sediment to rubble edge changes the community again. Hard substrate creates attachment points. Crevices, miniature overhangs, refuge from whatever hunts by probing the mud. You drift toward it because the basin has taught you already that edges matter. The first signs are subtle. A sponge crust spreads over one stone in muted cream and rust. A small sea whip rises from a firmer piece of rubble, its stem bending gently in the weak flow. Between two rocks, long antennae extend from darkness and withdraw when the water shifts around you. A crustacean lives there, using the crack as a doorway. On open mud, residents often leave signs. In rubble, they hide within architecture. The lagoon gives them both options. The stones themselves carry the memory of the walls above. They were once attached, part of Palau's rain-carved limestone body. Now detached and settled, they still create topography. A drowned karst wall can continue influencing life even after fragments of it have fallen and softened into the basin floor. Each block becomes a little cliff at the scale of a shrimp, a little cave at the scale of a brittle star, a little reef at the scale of a sponge. You move along the rubble margin and notice that the sediment here is slightly firmer and cleaner. That makes sense. Finer grains are less easily kept in place where even a slight near-bottom flow brushes past stone, so the rubble edge often loses some of its softest dust. That leaves a surface where attached life can grip, and where small mobile animals can move without sinking as deeply into loose mud. A sponge crust thickens over one angled piece of limestone, its pores too small to see, but its purpose very clear. It is filtering constantly, taking in the suspended world and turning it into tissue, one unseen stream at a time. Nearby, a small black coral branch leans outward from a shaded crack, each delicate branchlet held in the mild current. In brighter water, corals often build with the sun. Here, darker corals feed from the water itself. That difference matters. It tells you again that the basin floor is not merely a place where reef life weakens, it is a place where different strategies become practical. A crustacean steps out from between two stones, pale and flattened, and pauses as if listening. Its antennae move first, sampling the water before the rest of the body commits. Then it advances over the cleaner sediment and stops at the base of the sponge. There, a small drift of settled particles has gathered in the sponge's lee, protected from the faint sweep around the rubble. Even at this scale, topography sorts food. A stone interrupts flow. A quiet pocket forms behind it. Organic matter settles more readily there, and an animal that has learned the shape of those pockets can feed with less effort than it would on open ground. You continue along the margin instead of crossing back out into the smooth basin center. That choice reveals more edges, more cracks, more evidence of residents using stone as a scaffold within the mud. A brittle star wraps two arms around a pebble-sized fragment and extends the others into open water. A tiny crab presses itself flat beneath a shell shard. A worm's tube rises from between grains where mud has accumulated in a protected notch. This rubble line is not dramatic enough to call a reef. It is more like an archipelago in miniature, small islands of hardness in a soft-bottom sea. Because of that, the life here is slightly denser and slightly more layered than on the open floor a short distance away. The explanation is simple and old. Structure creates choices. Choices allow more bodies to coexist. Some animals need attachment points. Some need shade. Some need a firm place to rest. Some need a gentle eddy where suspended food slows down. A field of mud can support many patient feeders. A field of mud with scattered stone supports more kinds of patients. You drift over a shallow depression enclosed by rubble on three sides, and the sediment inside it looks darker than the plain beyond. That darker tone may mean finer grains, or a little more organic enrichment, or both. Depressions like this can become small traps within the larger basin. Falling particles settle into them and stay. Weak bottom flow passes over the rim and leaves the quiet center less disturbed. Over time, that can create richer patches for deposit feeders and microbes. Even a tiny bowl in the seabed becomes a concentrated version of the lagoon itself, an enclosed place holding older, softer material. A sea cucumber lies at the center of that little hollow, thicker bodied than the others you have passed. Its feeding is so steady that it seems less like movement than like continuation. This is one of the deep floor's recurring truths. Life here is often easiest to notice through what it changes. The surface in front of the sea cucumber is untouched. The surface behind it is sifted. The difference is almost ceremonial. Matter arrives from above, is accepted by the mud, then taken up and altered by animals that work without hurry. A small shell fragment just beyond the sea cucumber has been turned so that its brighter underside faces up. Something beneath or beside it has moved recently. Perhaps the passage of a crab. Perhaps the pressure wave from a worm pushing sediment aside underground. Perhaps the sea cucumber itself, nudging as it fed. Nothing on the floor stays absolutely fixed. The stillness here is alive with minor rearrangements. Each one leaves a mark. That is why the deep basin never feels empty after you have learned how to read it. There are too many signs. A furrow that did not exist a little while ago. A rim freshly cast at a burrow mouth. A stone more exposed than its neighbor. A bacterial film brighter in one patch than another. Even the absence of tracks in a certain area says something. Perhaps the sediment there is poorer. Perhaps the chemistry is less favorable. Perhaps no hard object interrupts the flow enough to trap what feeders want. Silence at this depth has details. You leave the rubble hollow and return gradually to broader open mud, where the floor smooths out again into gentle undulations. The transition feels like moving from a neighborhood back onto a plain. The scattered hard forms fall behind, the visible residents become fewer, and the basin begins to show more clearly what it preserves best when nothing interrupts the settling. Fine laminae are not visible to the naked eye here, not as neat stripes you can count in the dim. But the evenness of the surface hints at quiet accumulation over long periods. This is the sort of place where thin layers can build and remain, especially below the upper zone most actively stirred by burrowing life. In sheltered tropical basins, sediments often hold records of rainfall, productivity, erosion from nearby slopes, and changes in the lagoon's own circulation. A stronger monsoon season can wash more material from land. A period of healthy reef growth can add more carbonate grains. A blue in the upper water can increase the rain of organic matter. A shift in sea level over longer spans can alter how well deep water is renewed. Each change is translated downward into the floor. The mud beneath you is a slow memory, written in materials rather than words. You lower yourself slightly and hover just high enough not to disturb the surface. From here, the marine snow is easier to follow all the way to contact. One particle lands near a burrow opening and disappears as a tiny current draws it inward. Another settles on a shell fragment and remains. A third falls onto a bacterial patch where it will likely be colonized and broken apart quickly. This is the final stage of a long descent that began in the illuminated layers above. A flake of organic matter might once have been part of plankton near the surface. Then it sank through stratified water, passed through microbial veils, shared the dark with nightly migrants, avoided or escaped suspension feeders on the way down, and now, here, it joins the seabed's budget. No grain arrives alone in meaning. Each one belongs to the whole lagoon. A narrow fish shape appears again, this time closer to certainty. It hovers a few inches over the bottom, facing into the slightest detectable flow. The fish makes tiny corrections with its fins, then drops toward the mud and snaps at something too small to see. Small benthic fishes in deeper lagoon settings often live by this exact economy. Watch, wait. Take only what the sediment surface or near bottom water reveals. Their colors are subdued because color is no longer the main language here. Shape, stillness, and sensitivity have replaced display. The fish advances another short distance, then settles into near invisibility against the floor. You do not pursue it. If you hold your place, the basin often restores what movement would chase away. That is one of the deeper lessons of this lagoon. The quieter your attention becomes, the more complete the place feels. The sediment plain broadens ahead, and now the basin's central character becomes unmistakable. This is not a dramatic trench or a drop into black oceanic abyss. It is a sheltered tropical hollow, enclosed by ancient limestone and reef structures, holding a deep layer of older water over a floor of accumulated remains. Its beauty comes from retention. It keeps what other places disperse. It keeps sinking particles a little longer. It keeps water layers more neatly separated. It keeps traces of wet seasons, calm years, reef flourishes, and microbial work. It keeps the signs of animals whose bodies may never fully show themselves. And because it keeps these things, it becomes rich in a quiet way. A faint patch of shell grit extends across the mud like a pale fan. Its grains are brighter than the finer sediment around them, and their distribution is not random. This likely marks an area where weak bottom flow has left heavier fragments while carrying finer particles farther downslope or into adjacent hollows. Sorting is one of the floor's soft sculptors. Where water slows, the smallest particles settle. Where it brushes slightly faster, only coarser grains remain. Over long stretches of time, those differences create mosaics of texture. And texture changes how oxygen penetrates, how burrows hold, and how easily a feeder can process the surface. Even if you never saw a resident here, The sediment itself would be enough to tell you that life has options. A low, crescent-shaped ridge catches your eye ahead. At first it resembles a miniature dune. Then you notice the roughness along its inner edge and the way a narrow groove leads away from it. This is likely not current made alone. An animal has been working here. Perhaps a burrower pushed sediment outward in repeated pulses. Perhaps several passages collapsed and were repaired over time. The floor is often built jointly by biology and physics. A weak current shapes what animals have loosened. Animals exploit what weak current has sorted. Together they create forms that belong to neither influence by itself. A small, brittle star, half buried at the base of the crescent, lifts an arm into the water and lowers it again. Its behavior is almost too slight to call action, yet that arm is sensing particles, chemistry, touch, and the movement of water all at once. Echinoderms, like brittle stars, do not rely on the world the way fish do. They do not need bright images. They live by contact, by diffuse perception, by reading the immediate surroundings through every part of the body. That suits a floor where information arrives close and slowly. You think of the reef above, with its colors and quick recognitions, and the contrast becomes gentle but complete. The lagoon has not become less alive with depth. It has become less visual in the shallow water sense. The lower basin asks more from texture than from brightness. It prefers traces to flashes. It prefers persistence to performance. A pale sediment plume rises suddenly a short distance away, small and round, then thins. Something beneath the surface has shifted. You wait. The plume settles enough to reveal a new opening where none was visible before. A buried animal has either emerged and withdrawn or collapsed part of its own tunnel and begun to reopen it. This is how hidden life often introduces itself here, not with the body first, but with the evidence of engineering. The basin floor is full of engineers, worms building tubes, crustaceans ventilating burrows, holothurians turning the upper surface, microbes changing chemistry in invisible bands. Every one of them modifies the habitat for something else. That is why soft sediment can support such a web of quiet interaction. The substrate itself is part of the community. To alter it is to alter everyone's conditions. In places where deep water exchange is limited, the chemistry just above and just below the sediment-water boundary can become especially important. Oxygen in the deep basin is replenished only as quickly as renewal and mixing allow. But organic matter falls steadily, and bacteria use oxygen while breaking it down. That means the available oxygen near the floor may be lower than in the upper lagoon, sometimes only modestly so, sometimes more strongly depending on season and basin shape. Animals living here are therefore not just feeding on what settles. They are living within a narrow balance between supply and breath. Species that can tolerate lower oxygen, or reduce their energy use, or keep their bodies close to ventilated burrows, have an advantage. That helps explain the mood of the floor, the still postures, the conservative movements, the economy of motion. Life is not struggling in any dramatic sense. It is simply arranged around thrift. A second sea cucumber crosses your path from left to right, and this one bears a light dusting of shell grit adhered to its skin. That dusting makes it look almost geological, as if the animal has taken on the floor's own texture. Camouflage here is often not bright mimicry, but agreement. To resemble the sediment is enough. To move no faster than the environment expects is enough. The sea cucumber reaches a slightly darker patch and continues feeding there, as though it can detect the richer surface film more clearly than your eyes can. It probably can. Many deposit feeders are finely tuned to chemical cues and to the quality of organic matter in the topmost grains. The floor may look nearly uniform to you. To them, it is patchy with preference. This patchwork extends far beyond what the eye can resolve. A few feet away, a cluster of tiny mounds rises from the mud, each no bigger than a knuckle. They are arranged irregularly, but not randomly. There may be a branching tunnel system beneath them, with multiple vents and outlets. Sediment expelled from one opening forms a mound. Water drawn into another keeps the network functioning. A hidden body below maintains the whole arrangement. On land, an anthill or burrow entrance signals occupation. Here, mounds and vents perform the same role. They tell you the deep floor is inhabited from within as much as from above. That underground dimension gives the basin a second architecture. The drowned limestone walls shaped the water column and created shelters along the slopes. Now, on the plain, burrows and tubes shape the sediment itself. One architecture is made of ancient stone, the other of repeated living labor. Both decide who can stay. You drift over an area where the surface has a faintly stippled look, peppered with tiny pellets and grains sorted into uneven clusters. This may be the aftermath of recent feeding by small deposit feeders, or the breakdown of marine snow aggregates after landing. Organic clumps rarely remain whole for long. They are too valuable. Microbes colonize them. Minute crustaceans and worms graze them. Water movement disperses them. By morning, a rich little clump may have been transformed into many smaller traces, each taken in a different direction by life. The floor is a place where concentrated events become distributed memory. Above, the nightly migrants move through layers of water. Down here, those migrations are translated into sediment patterns. The connection is quiet but exact. Zooplankton fed higher in the basin. They released compact pellets that sank efficiently. Predators fed on them and produced their own waste. Some bodies died and fell whole. All of that now arrives in pieces on the basin floor. The deep plain therefore contains the aftermath of the night sea above it. This is why the lagoon works as one system despite its layers. The chemistries differ, the communities differ, the movements differ, but almost everything touches bottom eventually. That common destination ties the whole place together. The rubble margin has disappeared behind you now, and the central floor feels broader, flatter, and more receptive than before. This openness changes your own sense of depth. Along walls and ledges, depth had direction. There was always a surface to follow. Out here, depth becomes simply the distance between falling particles and where they land. The basin is less a corridor now than a bowl, and because you are near its bottom, you can feel that bowl collecting the upper lagoon in silence. A faint pale thread lies across the sediment and vanishes into a burrow. It may be mucus, or a feeding line, or the cast skin of a small invertebrate. Whatever it is, it reminds you that even temporary materials can matter here. Mucus in the marine world is not waste in the simple way the word may suggest. It binds particles, forms nets, creates aggregates that sink faster than single cells would. Some planktonic animals build mucus houses that are abandoned and drift downward as ready-made packages of organic matter. So even slime becomes part of the carbon path from light to dark. The basin wastes little. A tiny crab reaches the pale thread, manipulates it briefly, and tears off a portion too small to follow. Resourcefulness on the floor is often very quiet. No dramatic capture, no visible contest, just the steady harvest of whatever can be eaten before it is buried, dissolved, or claimed by someone else. That is enough to sustain a patient life. You pass above a shallow, broad area where the sediment looks almost polished, smooth as if repeatedly combed. Then, at its margin, the texture roughens abruptly with pellets, shell grit, and low casts. This contrast may reflect a subtle gradient in flow or in feeding intensity. One patch may be routinely worked by deposit feeders. Another may be more often swept clean by gentle bottom currents. Such small differences accumulate into patterns that can persist for long periods. The floor becomes legible as a map of repeated behavior. If you could watch for many nights, you would likely see the same routes used, the same feeding patches revisited, the same burrows reopened and repaired. Constancy, not spectacle, shapes the deep lagoon. The sediment here also keeps records on timescales no resident can perceive. A sea cucumber feeding tonight reworks the top layer, but below that thin, active skin, older deposits remain. A few inches down may lie material from years ago, deeper still, decades. Farther down, centuries. In some enclosed basins, if disturbance is low enough and accumulation steady enough, the deeper layers can preserve long sequences of environmental change. That means the floor beneath you holds two tempos at once. At the top, quick ecological revision. At depth, slow geological storage. Life edits the page while time keeps the archive. A brittle star, almost perfectly matched to the mud, begins to move across your path. Its motion is smooth and jointed, arms pulling in coordinated sequence. For a moment, the floor seems to gain a shape all at once, as if a part of the sediment has decided to travel. Then the animal reaches a slight rise, folds itself lower, and becomes landscape again. This ability to vanish into context is common here. Animals do not dominate the scene, they merge with it. That makes the basin feel less like a stage and more like an agreement between bodies in place. The farther you drift across the central plain, the more the question changes. At first, descending under the rock islands, you were asking what lives in the hidden depths. Now the answer feels broader. What lives here is not only a list of species, it is a process of receiving, sorting, transforming, and storing. The residents are part of that process. Sea cucumbers, brittle stars, worms, small crabs, microbes, and near-bottom fishes all participate in turning rain from above into movement below. The geology participates too, by shaping the basin that traps deeper water and allows these slow conditions to persist. Even the nightly migrants participate, though they may spend much of their lives elsewhere in the water column. The hidden depths are a system before they are a cast of characters. You continue outward, over the floor, until the basin seems to widen beyond what the dimness can define. Now there are fewer shell fragments, fewer obvious burrow rims. The mud appears more continuous, more evenly settled. This may be the deepest and quietest interior where only the finest material reaches and remains. Such central depot centers, the places where particles accumulate most efficiently, are often the best archives. They are also places where life may be a little sparser at the surface, because the sediment is finer, softer, and in some cases lower in oxygen just below the topmost layer. Yet even here, the plain is not barren. A low meandering line, almost erased, suggests an earlier feeding track. Tiny pinprick holes dot one patch, perhaps marking the surface expression of minute infaunal activity. And marine snow continues to fall, steadily enough that the bottom never truly stops changing. You realize that there is nowhere lower to go inside this basin without entering the sediment itself. The descent, in the physical sense, is nearly complete. So the movement changes. It is no longer downward so much as outward, and inward at the same time. You remain just above the mud and let the floor become the center of attention. From here, the rock islands are unimaginably far above, though the basin still belongs to them completely. Their limestone made these walls, their drowned valleys shaped this hollow. Their shelter slowed the water enough for deep layers to form and for this soft plain to gather beneath them. That is the first thing the bottom teaches. The floor is not separate from the islands, it is the islands, translated into sediment and stillness. A few more particles descend past you and settle without sound. One lands on a faint bacterial film and disappears into the texture of it. Another catches on the rim of a tiny burrow and remains there, as if offered. A third is taken almost at once by a small worm's feeding thread, reeled down into the unseen. This is how the lagoon continues in darkness. Not with large motions now, but with acceptance. Everything that was bright above eventually arrives here in some softer form. A flash of life becomes a grain. A drifting body becomes nourishment. A season becomes a layer. You follow a broad, processed ribbon across the mud, where a sea cucumber passed earlier and has already moved beyond sight. Its trail is faintly smoother than the surrounding floor, and a little paler in the dimness. Around its edges, new particles are already settling. That quick softening matters. It means even fresh signs begin to join the archive almost immediately. The floor is always recording, but it is also always being revised. That balance between memory and change is what makes enclosed basins so interesting to study. If too much current sweeps through, the record is disturbed. If too little life stirs the upper surface, the ecology can become narrow. Here, in a protected Palauan basin, both forces remain present in moderation, enough settling to preserve long stories, enough feeding and burrowing to keep the top layer alive. A shallow depression ahead holds finer sediment than the plain around it. The mud there is darker, and the marine snow seems to gather in it a little more readily. Small hollows like this can become tiny zones of enrichment. Organic fragments settle and stay. Microbes increase. Deposit feeders return more often. That pattern scales upward through the whole lagoon. A little pocket holds more than the plain. A deeper basin holds more than the shelf. An enclosed lagoon holds more than open water would in the same space. Palau is full of these nested forms of holding. The islands hold coves. The coves hold calm water. The calm water holds layers. The layers hold drifting life. And at the lowest level, the mud holds what everything else releases. To your left, the sediment is marked by delicate looping traces, as though something moved just under the surface with patient hesitation, likely a worm or a small burrowing crustacean feeding between the grains where oxygen still lingers. The loops cross one another, then stop at a tiny opening no wider than a seed. No body appears. Only the evidence remains. That feels natural now. At this depth, presence is often known by effect. A trail means hunger. A mound means excavation. A cleaner patch means sorting by current, or by feeding, or by both. You no longer need every resident to show itself fully. The basin has trained your attention toward aftermath. This makes the floor feel curiously intimate, not because it reveals everything, but because it leaves traces the way a quiet room does. A chair slightly moved, a cup still warm. You know someone has been there, even if they have already gone still again. Here, a ribbon of sifted sediment and a ringed burrow opening say the same. The deeper lagoon is inhabited by signatures. A small, brittle star begins to move from one patch of mud to another. Its arms pull in sequence, smooth and careful, and the central disc glides just above the grains. Then it stops beside a shell fragment and lowers itself so completely that only the arm tips remain distinct. This is one of the floor's oldest strategies. Move when needed, then become part of the landscape again. Camouflage here is not spectacle. It is agreement with the place the same pale dust coats skin, shell, and stone. The same low light softens every edge. An animal survives by blending into a system where almost nothing is sharp. If you could see through the mud beneath you, the simplicity of the floor would disappear. Below the smooth surface is a crowded architecture of tubes, pockets, oxygenated margins, and chemically different layers stacked only millimeters apart. At the very top, oxygen from the deep water still reaches into the sediment, though not deeply. That thin surface skin is where many microbes work fastest and where the richest organic films collect. Below it, as bacteria continue breaking down what falls from above, oxygen fades. Then other microbial pathways take over, continuing the work in darkness and stillness. Those shifts matter to every resident. A worm that irrigates its tunnel changes the chemistry around it. A burrow becomes a narrow vein of more breathable conditions. A patch without burrows may remain more chemically reduced just below the surface. So the seabed is not one habitat. It is many small habitats, layered vertically and spread laterally across the basin floor. This is why even a plain of mud can support such varied, quiet life. The details are simply scaled down. A small fish appears again, nearly transparent against the dim water just above the sediment. It faces into the weakest current, watching the surface with wide, patient eyes. Then, with a tiny forward motion, it takes something from the mud and settles once more. That small action carries the whole basin in it. Something fell. Something colonized it. Something edible formed at the surface. And this fish, tuned to the near-bottom world, made use of it. Nothing here is disconnected. Even the briefest feeding snap depends on the long descent of matter from above, and on the geology that created a place quiet enough to hold that matter in the first place. You drift over a patch where shell fragments are more common. Some are curved and bright, some are worn nearly flat, some are broken into angular pieces that catch a little of the remaining dimness. Carbonate material like this is one of the lagoon's steady offerings to its own floor. Corals, mollusks, calcareous algae, tiny plankton with mineral shells, all contribute over time. Broken by grazers, waves in shallower zones, storms, and simple aging, those fragments settle into deeper pockets where water is calm enough to keep them. That means the floor is partly made of former reef. The bright upper world is here, only ground finer, softened, and mixed with everything else. In a sediment core, those carbonate grains help tell the story of reef productivity. More reef building above can leave a stronger mineral signature below. Shifts in species can alter the shape and chemistry of the grains arriving at depth. Periods of erosion from islands can dilute that carbonate with more land-derived particles. Nothing on the floor is mute if you know how to listen. The basin speaks in textures. A low, broad mound interrupts the flatness ahead. At first, it seems geological, just a subtle roll in the plain. Then a little cloud of fine sediment lifts from one side and settles again. Something beneath the mound is active, perhaps a burrowing shrimp maintaining a chamber, perhaps a worm network with several entrances. These hidden engineers are among the floor's most important residents because they mix the upper sediment and ventilate it. Their movements bring water down. They lift older grains up. They redistribute the freshest organic material below the surface, where microbes can continue processing it. Without that bioturbation, the top layer would behave very differently. Food would remain more strictly at the interface. Oxygen would penetrate less unevenly. Certain chemical signatures in the record would stay sharper. Life, by living here, edits the conditions for the next life. That is the floor's quiet reciprocity. It becomes clear now that the basin keeps two kinds of secrets. One is biological. Many residents remain hidden in the mud, or appear only as traces, or emerge only at certain hours and seasons. The other is historical. The sediment stores years that no eye has watched continuously. Rainy seasons settle into dry seasons. Strong productivity settles into weak productivity. Periods of better deepwater renewal settle into periods of stronger stratification. Those changes are layered together below you, the recent nearest the surface, the older deeper down. This is why enclosed lagoons are so valuable to science. They are natural recorders. A protected basin can preserve local climate signals, reef development, and shifts in circulation with remarkable fidelity, especially where sediment arrives steadily and disturbance remains gentle. Palau's deep lagoon floors are among those quiet recorders. They keep what passing weather forgets. A tiny crab pauses beside a burrow mouth and touches the rim with one claw. Then it circles and disappears into another opening a short distance away. That simple movement reminds you that the floor is not divided into neat species territories the way a map might suggest. Openings may be reused. Old tunnels may collapse and be reoccupied. Shell fragments may become shelters after lying exposed for years. A sea cucumber trail may expose buried particles that another animal then uses. Everything is layered not only in time but in use. The basin recycles structures as patiently as it recycles matter. Even a dead shell can become a shelter. Even an abandoned tube can become a doorway. That reuse makes the floor feel old in a comforting way. Not abandoned, lived in for a very long time. You let your eyes travel farther across the plain, and the openness begins to feel less empty than generous. There is room here, room between brittle stars, room between feeding trails, room between each falling particle and the one that follows it. The ocean often gives that gift at depth, a wide spacing that calms the mind. Nothing presses too close, nothing demands quick attention. The basin floor receives without urgency, and because it does, Your own attention spreads out and softens with it. This is one reason darkness in the sea can feel peaceful rather than frightening. It removes excess detail. It leaves only what matters. A patch of finer mud to the right appears almost untouched. No obvious tracks, no shell fragments, no raised burrows. At first, it might seem lifeless, but that is rarely the case. It may simply be a place where the active residents stay just below the surface, feeding upward through invisible threads or waiting for fresher material to arrive. Some zones of the basin are worked more from within than across the top. Others are richer in oxygen and allow more obvious surface movement. Some are briefly enriched after pulses of settling from above, then quiet again. The deep floor changes in patches, and those patches shift through time. What is still tonight may be busy after the next bloom, or after a period of weaker mixing changes the chemistry overhead. That uncertainty is part of the lagoon's reserve. Even in a mapped basin, much remains conditional. A faint glow flashes in the water a little above the floor, then vanishes. One of the last night migrants still working low, a shrimp perhaps, or a disturbed planktonic spark drifting down from the higher feeding layer. It reminds you that the basin is never fully sealed from the water above it. Even here, near the mud, there is exchange. Fresh particles arrive, occasional drifters descend. Dissolved nutrients released from the sediment can move upward again. On larger timescales, if denser outside water enters over a sill and renews the basin, the whole deep layer may shift in chemistry. That renewal is important. Without it, oxygen could continue declining in deeper pockets as sinking organic matter is consumed. With it, the lower basin is refreshed, at least partly, and the cycle begins again. So the floor depends not only on what falls from above, but also on how often older deep water is replaced. The shape of the drowned landscape decides that schedule. Karst topography, reef rims, sills, and channels all govern the breathing of the basin. Geology decides the pulse. Ecology answers it. Nearby, a small sea cucumber has climbed halfway onto a low shell bank, where coarser grains are gathered. Its body curves over the ridge, feeding from the uppermost dust between brighter fragments. This is another subtle choice. A shell-rich patch can trap organic films in tiny protected spaces, while still allowing slightly better oxygen penetration between the grains than very fine compact mud. Different deposit feeders may prefer different textures for that reason. The basin floor may look smooth from a distance, but for the animals living on it, texture is opportunity. A single change from siltier mud to shell grit can alter what kinds of microbes grow there, how deeply water penetrates, and how easy it is to process the surface. That means food is not spread evenly. It is patterned by grain size, chemistry, and topography all at once. The sea cucumber knows this without needing to know it in words. Its path follows nourishment. That is enough. You pass over another shallow field of pinprick openings, more numerous here than before. Minute faunal animals likely live beneath them, each one occupying a narrow vertical tube or shallow chamber. Such small life is easy to underestimate because it barely alters the scene at first glance. But in terms of abundance and processing power, these tiny workers can dominate the floor. Their feeding, waste production, burrow irrigation, and microbial partnerships help determine how rapidly organic matter is recycled. They are the unseen clerks of the sediment, quiet, numerous, and essential. The basin's largest residents may catch the eye. Its smallest residents do much of the bookkeeping. As you remain low over the floor, another thought becomes clear. The question of what lives here can never be answered once and for all. The community shifts with tide, rainfall, season, and the amount of sinking material produced above. A period of stronger surface productivity can send more food downward and favor certain deposit feeders. A phase of weaker renewal can reduce oxygen in deeper layers and push some animals upward or outward. Heavy rain over the islands can alter runoff and subtly change what reaches enclosed basins. Even the nightly migration varies. changing how much organic matter is repackaged in the water column before reaching the mud. So the lagoon's deep life is not fixed. It is situational. A certain species may be common in this basin one season, then sparse the next. A microbial layer may thicken, then thin. A sediment patch may alternate between being frequently worked and barely touched. That seasonal and conditional quality is one reason the depths feel secretive. Not because they refuse to be known, because they are always slightly changing their emphasis. The broad plain around you continues into darkness beyond what the eye can hold. Somewhere above, the rock islands still rise into humid night air. Bats may cross between them. Mangroves may hold their own still water at the roots. Coral terraces may continue their slow exchange with tides and moonlight. And all of that, the islands, the reefs, the plankton, the rain, the daily migration, is tied to this quiet floor by sinking matter and stored time. The basin is not separate from the rest of Palau. It is where the rest of Palau comes to rest. A low line of limestone rubble appears again at the far edge of your view, half swallowed by mud. You could drift toward it, return to edges and crevices, and gather more visible signs of hidden residents. Or you could remain out here on the softer center, where evidence is fainter but the archive is cleaner. You stay with the open plain. That choice fits the depth. There is nowhere else to descend in space, so the descent turns into duration. You begin to notice the sediment not as a surface alone, but as a slow accumulation of moments. This particle settling now, that trail from earlier tonight, the deeper layer below from a different season, the older layer beneath that from another year entirely. The basin floor becomes almost like snowfall in a forest clearing, where each new fall softens the prints beneath without fully erasing them. A tiny plume rises from a hidden burrow and drifts sideways before fading. Then all is still again. The plain receives the interruption and returns to calm. That calm is not fragile. It is practiced. The lagoon has been doing this for thousands of years. Sea level rose, the valleys flooded, corals colonized the shallows, protected hollows trapped deeper water, organic matter settled. Microbes consumed and transformed it. Animals adapted to the dim layers and the soft floor. Year after year, tide after tide, the process continued without needing to announce itself. You are only passing through 1 hour of it. The basin will keep going in exactly this way after your attention moves on. The mud beneath you holds the remains of uncounted lives. But it does not feel mournful. It feels fertile in a quiet, circular sense. What falls is not merely lost. It is reused, dissolved, buried, and sometimes preserved. A shell becomes shelter, then sediment. A bloom becomes marine snow, then bacterial food, then worm cast, then deeper layer. A fish feeds in the migration above, releases waste below, and in doing so helps nourish a benthic community it will never see. The lagoon's deepest beauty may be this refusal to waste. Everything enters another rhythm. Even darkness becomes productive. A near-bottom fish glides through the edge of your vision and stops beside a shell fragment, almost vertical for a moment, as it inspects the sediment. Then it levels and disappears into the grey. That small vanishing act feels like the right scale for this place. Nothing insists on being center stage. The hidden depths live by modest appearances. The deeper you stay, the more that modesty begins to feel like wisdom. There is no need for brightness here, no need for display. The basin is content to be layered, partial, and slow. Somewhere beyond sight, in another pocket under the rock islands, conditions may be slightly different tonight. Another basin may be more strongly stratified. Another may receive more renewal over a sill. Another may hold more shell grit, or softer mud, or a richer microbial veil at the chemocline. That patchwork means no single descent can exhaust the lagoon. Even when mapped, sampled, and revisited, it keeps some of its life hidden in timing and chemistry. A creature rises only under a certain darkness. A layer sharpens only after a calm stretch of weather. A benthic patch becomes active only when fresh organic material settles there. Knowledge here is always partial, and that partialness is not a failure. It is part of the place. Palau's lagoon depths remain peaceful partly because they do not hurry to explain themselves. They let you witness what the conditions allow and keep the rest in reserve. You continue hovering over the soft floor, watching particles descend one by one. Each one takes the same final path, through layered water, past the last dim migrants, into the wide bowl of the basin, onto mud that has been waiting for a very long time. And as more of that fine rain settles, the plain seems to grow even softer, even quieter, as if the lagoon is drawing a thin blanket over its own thoughts. Far above, the islands remain. Here below, only sediment, dark water, and the patient work of hidden life continue. And in that continuing, the basin keeps its oldest secret,